So how about this? We have a delay because there is no first base coach right now for the Chicago White Sox, which is quite incredible. Something that usually happens at a Little League game.
It's supposed to be Jason Bourgeois.
And so apparently he's not down there. They're yelling anybody. Anybody can coach first base.
Can Wiley Ballard coach first base?
I didn't know that was a rule that you had to have a first base coach.
I have never. This is a new one. I've never seen this.
So they're going to send out somebody.
Meanwhile, Tyler Matzik is waiting to enter the game here in the bottom of the 8th after Dylan Lee pitched before the rain delay.
It's pretty brutal that somebody has not just grabbed a helmet and gone out there. Like why this is taking so long. We know how deep staffs run. There's so many coaches. And the White Sox are just standing around looking at each other.
The Chicago White Sox. They suck.
Oh no! We suck again!
They are the worst team in baseball and have lost an impressive 21 games in a row. This team is terrible. But what if I were to tell you about 3 years ago? This team was viewed as a World Series contender with young players to build around. So we're going to look into what that era was supposed to be and how we got here.
Tying run at second, 2 out. Palmeiro over the head of Jenks. Uribe charges, throws, out! And the White Sox have won the World Series.
In 2005, the Chicago White Sox won their 3rd World Series and their first since 1917. They were believed to be cursed by many. In the 1919 World Series, 8 members of the Chicago White Sox were bribed by gamblers to throw the World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. The 8 members were caught and would receive lifetime bans, the most infamous being Shoeless Joe Jackson, which has kept him out of the Hall of Fame. The architect of the 2005 team was GM Kenny Williams. The man who signed the checks for the team was the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf. It was his 7th championship after Michael Jordan won him 6th with the Chicago Bulls. However, their 2005 championship would turn out to be an anomaly. They only made the playoffs 1 time following the championship and never quite replicated the success. They hung around the 75-win plateau. In 2015, in the middle of a playoff run, they decided to trade for pitcher James Shields. One of the players in the trade was Fernando Tatis Jr. It turned out to be an absolutely terrible trade. Shields was absolutely terrible with the White Sox, while Tatis blossomed into a star player. It didn't work out and they missed the playoffs in 2015. And it didn't get much better in 2016. But the White Sox did have talent. Chris Sale was a Cy Young caliber pitcher. Jose Quintana was a solid all-star pitcher. Adam Eaton was a quality outfield bat. Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu were great young players. But it was just not enough to compete. In 2016, their northern rival Chicago Cubs won their first World Series in 108 years. Their president Theo Epstein had found an interesting way to build the championship team: tanking. When he took over in 2011, he traded away many of its veteran players for prospects. While the team was terrible for 2 years, it allowed them to acquire high draft picks. With a focus on developing young players, it led out to many breakout young hitters, such as Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo. They would then add veterans in free agency to put the team together. It's what led to the 2016 team. By this time, the White Sox had made changes in the front office. 4 years earlier, Kenny Williams was promoted to Executive Vice President, and Assistant General Manager Rick Hahn was promoted to GM. After the 2016 season, Robin Ventura, the team's manager, and Nolan Ryan's bitch.
Here's Ventura, RBI single in the first. Watch out. Look at this.
Would resign, and bench coach Rick Renteria was promoted to manager. Hahn and Williams had an interesting decision to make on how they would take the team. Do you stick with the current core you have and build around them? Or you do what the Cubs did and trade it away for young talent? They would choose the latter. The first player to be moved was ace Chris Sale to the Boston Red Sox in exchange for Yoan Moncada, the number 2 ranked prospect, and Michael Kopech, a pitcher ranked number 19. A couple days later, outfielder Adam Eaton was moved to the Washington Nationals in exchange for pitching prospect Lucas Giolito, ranked number 12, and another pitching prospect in Renato Lopez, ranked number 45. The White Sox received praise for acquiring top prospects that could be built into a contender. They also signed Cuban outfielder Luis Robert as an international free agent, who was at one point the number 3 ranked prospect. In 2017, the team was terrible, but it was all part of the plan. At the trade deadline, the team dealt away pitcher Jose Quintana to the north side for number 5 prospect Eloy Jimenez and pitching prospect Dylan Cease, ranked number 61. Going into the 2018 season, the White Sox had the number 3 ranked farm system in baseball. 2018 was still rough with a 100-loss season, but it was simply about developing the prospects who could become key pieces to a World Series team. However, the 2018 offseason would be one of the biggest offseasons in baseball history, with the 2 top free agents being Bryce Harper and Manny Machado. They tried to make a run at Machado, but he would sign with the San Diego Padres. Harper did meet with the team, but he ultimately chose to sign with the Philadelphia Phillies. Despite missing on 2 of the top free agents, Williams and Hahn looked to continue to develop their young core. 2019 showed signs of progress. Moncada had a breakout season and looked like the star of the team. After a terrible 2018 season, Giolito rebounded to become an all-star. They once again missed the playoffs, but with Moncada and Giolito looking like franchise players, and Eloy Jimenez debuting plus more in the pipeline, the future seemed bright. Hahn decided to go big for 2020, and in free agency, he signed all-star catcher Yasmani Grandal, power-hitting veteran Edwin Encarnacion, and former Cy Young winner Dallas Keuchel. Before the start of the season, they signed Yoan Moncada to an extension early, believing him to be the next star of the franchise. The 2020 season was a weird one due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The season was only 60 games, and the playoffs were expanded to 16 teams. The Chicago White Sox would make the playoffs for the first time since 2008. Their young hitting core was continuing to develop. Keuchel and Grandal proved to be solid additions, not so much for Encarnacion, who turned out to be a disappointment. First baseman Jose Abreu would take home AL MVP. Eloy Jimenez and Tim Anderson were also key contributors to the lineup. However, their season would end the wild card round to the Oakland Athletics. Despite the quick postseason exit, the White Sox still had a young core and were expected to compete in 2021. However, the White Sox front office had questions about leadership. Despite leading them to the playoffs and finishing 3rd in AL Manager of the Year, Rick Renteria was believed not to be the person to lead them to a championship. He would end up being fired. Hahn and Williams considered hiring former Houston Astros manager A.J. Hinch, who won a ring in 2017, but he was fired and suspended last season for his role in the Astros sign-stealing scandal. However, owner Jerry Reinsdorf had what he thought was a better idea. In 1983, the Chicago White Sox made the ALCS, in which they lost to the Baltimore Orioles. Their manager was a young Tony La Russa. However, La Russa was fired in the middle of the 1986 season after being 12 games under 500. He would then immediately take a job with the Oakland Athletics and led them to a 1989 World Series. He would then take over as Cardinals manager and led them to World Series wins in 2006 and 2011 before he retired. Reinsdorf said his biggest mistake as owner was firing La Russa, and over time, La Russa and Reinsdorf had become close to each other. Whether he wanted to make up for a past mistake or believed he was the right man for the job, Reinsdorf hired Tony La Russa to be the next manager of the Chicago White Sox. The hire received a mixed response. While La Russa was an accomplished manager, he was out of it for almost a decade, and he was also in his late 70s. Following La Russa's hiring, Hahn looked to load for a deep playoff run, signing closer Liam Hendriks and trading for starter Lance Lynn. The White Sox were expected to compete for the American League in 2021.
Focusing. 3-2. Rodon to third. Moncada. Carlos Rodon has thrown a no-hitter. After everything he's been through, the elbow and the shoulder were supreme on April 14th, 2021.
The 2021 season did have its challenges. Mainly guys like Jimenez, Moncada, and Robert missed time with injury. Despite the injuries in the lineup, the pitching rotation picked up the slack. Lance Lynn was the best starter and finished 3rd in AL Cy Young voting. Carlos Rodon, who had struggled to stay healthy through most of his career, threw a no-hitter early and was named an All-Star. One player who came out of nowhere was Yermin Mercedes, who in his first start collected 5 hits and won AL Rookie of the Month. He quickly earned the nickname by fans, the Yerminator. Despite his amazing start, it would come crashing down on May 11. In a game against the Minnesota Twins, with the White Sox up 15-4, the Twins had a position player on the mound, and on a 3-0 count, Mercedes did this.
9-225 up against 5'11", 245.
Looks like a softball, slow pitch softball game. It's 3-0.
Oh, he loaded up. Mercedes tattoos it to center. It is gone.
There you go.
A 3-0 swing, and it's 16-4.
Well, I'm thinking that probably does it.
His manager, Tony La Russa, was not a fan, as swinging on a 3-0 count when your team is up big went against baseball's unwritten rules. La Russa heavily called out Mercedes in the media following the game. Following that game, Mercedes never quite found the success he had earlier, and struggled before being sent down in June.
Answer. Is this heaven? I don't think I heard you. Is this heaven? Yes, it is. This field is for the players. Good luck today.
There is Giancarlo. Gallo at first, the tying run. Stanton, the go-ahead run.
There it goes! Back at the wall, it is gone! Yankees on top, 8-7. Tim Anderson digging in 1 for 4 tonight.
Good matchup here for a low ball hitter, sinking fastball.
Anderson hits it in the air to right. Back at the wall, and the White Sox win it! Well, you can throw the party, but you never know how it's going to turn out.
That's unreal.
And how about 6 runs on the board in the 9th inning alone, and the White Sox with a walk-off 9-8 win. This was some kind of night for baseball.
It sure was, and the most energetic guy on the team ends up winning it and letting everybody know about it. As soon as he made contact, he knew it was gone. And what a game.
Makes a winner out of Hendricks, a loser out of Britton.
Now, this just was a good matchup for the way that Tim Anderson likes to hit, and he gets the barrel.
Despite the injuries, the White Sox would win the AL Central and make back-to-back playoff appearances for the first time in franchise history. However, in the ALDS, the White Sox were crushed by the Houston Astros. The White Sox were expected to once again win the AL Central and make it back to the postseason. However, the team struggled through most of the year. The pitching took a step back after Rondon signed with the San Francisco Giants in free agency, and Dallas Keuchel was DFA'd after a rough start. Dylan Cease was the lone bright star and finished second in AL Cy Young voting. The lineup once again dealt with injuries. Jimenez and Robert both missed time with injuries. Moncada, the once hyped prospect, struggled in 2022. Grandal had the worst season of his career. Tony La Russa also came under fire, with many believing he did not understand the modern game. In August of 2022, with the Chicago White Sox 2 games under 500, La Russa took a step aside due to health concerns. He would retire at the end of the season. However, once La Russa left and many players came back from injury, the team would find themselves back in playoff tension. However, they were hurt by an 8-game losing streak, including a sweep at the hands of rival Cleveland that cost them the playoffs. A team expected to compete for the playoffs finished 500. With La Russa now retired, the team went looking for a new manager. The team ultimately settled on Kansas City Royals bench coach Pedro Grifol. The Royals had finished with 65 wins last year, and the team had also fired its manager. Former MVP and longtime first baseman Jose Abreu would leave in free agency to the Houston Astros. It turned out to be a good thing as Abreu struggled in Houston, but it was tough to let a longtime face of the franchise go. In free agency, the White Sox signed outfielder Andrew Benintendi, who Williams badly wanted to draft back in 2005 before being selected 1 pick ahead of him. To boost the rotation, they signed Mike Clevenger. However, before the season started, Clevenger was under investigation by the MLB over allegations of abusing his 10-month-old daughter. He would be cleared of any wrongdoing and would face no discipline. The 2023 season would prove to be a disaster. Liam Hendriks missed the entire season after being diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and later undergoing Tommy John surgery following an arm injury. At the start of the season, a Chicago White Sox fan named Berto, a caller on a Chicago sports radio show, went on a rant about the team.
I'm going to give them one last shot. And when they canceled Sox Fest, like the cowards they are, I knew something was up. But now we know. Obviously, the experiment is over. The vast majority of the prospects have been busts. The product on the field is pathetic. You'd think that would be enough to wake this organization up. But yesterday, Kenny Williams had the gall to say that he's not in a good place right now, and accountability is not an issue. You're right, he's not in a good place. He's not in a job he should have. Think about all the promises that Rick Hahn made, mired in mediocrity. That he bragged about Romy Gonzalez in spring training, and I'll trade him if I get the right price. Think about the things Grifol said, come to the park, we're going to kick everyone's butt. They must have been talking about the fans, not the other teams. The entire lineup is batting under 220. The best hitter on the team is Jake Berger. We're a AAA team. Our right fielders are hitting 180 with a weighted run created plus of 28. I don't even need to tell you about the pitching staff. Katz has got to go. Moncada, TA, Eloy, Yaz, Joe Kelly. It's week 4. They've all already been hurt. Tens of millions of dollars on replacement level players while stars go elsewhere. In the 15 years of Rick Hahn, we have been a constant experiment that has never panned out. In the 25 years of Kenny Williams, we had exactly 1 season of excellence with a perfect storm of players that has not once come even close to being the same. I don't want to hear about the strength of schedule in April. With the money we've spent, the players we have, playing 500 ball should be underachieving, not 11 games under 500. We keep going after players that Rick Hahn liked 5 years ago. Lance Lynn, over the hill. Yaz, over the hill. Benintendi, he wanted him in the draft 6 years ago. He's got a .1 WAR. Clevenger isn't just a clubhouse cancer and a disgusting human being. He's a horrendous pitcher. The entire organization is poisoned. The entire way that they go about their business is a failure. Firing Rick isn't enough. Firing Kenny isn't enough. If Chris Getz gets promoted and we have to sit through another 15-year retool rebuild, you're just going to hear from me again in 2038.
Yohan Moncada struggled and looked nowhere near the top prospect he was hyped to be. Andrew Benintendi, the big free agent signing, struggled to produce. Eloy Jimenez once again struggled with injuries. The pitching regressed heavily. Lance Lynn struggled and would be traded at the deadline. Lucas Giolito was also traded at the deadline. One of the players traded at the deadline was Kenyon Middleton. After being traded to the Yankees, he ripped manager Pedro Grifol and the White Sox clubhouse culture. The team finished with over 100 losses. The only bright spot for the team was Luis Robert, who made the All-Star game. In the middle of the awful season, Executive Vice President Kenny Williams and GM Rick Hahn were both fired. The men who had set out a plan to rebuild the Chicago White Sox had left the team in disarray. After their firings, Jerry Reinsdorf chose not to interview anyone outside the organization, and 10 days after the firing, farm director Chris Getz was promoted to GM. In the offseason, longtime shortstop Tim Anderson would depart. He had led the league in batting average in 2019, but it declined heavily in 2023. Yasmani Grandal, the big free agent signing years ago, would also depart after heavily declining each season. Before the start of the season, the team would trade away Dylan Cease to the San Diego Padres. In 2024, the Chicago White Sox sank even lower in 2024. The team would lose 22 of their first 25 games. Their offense struggled heavily. One of the few good things was pitcher Garrett Crochet, who had a breakout season as a starter and maybe would have been traded at the deadline if it weren't for his demands. Eloy Jimenez, one of the many young players hyped up, was traded to Baltimore. He left only Robert and Makata as some of the final hyped up prospects from the White Sox failed rebuild.
Can I be? How bad could I possibly be? Let's see. All the customers are buying, and the money's multiplying, and the PR people are lying, and the lawyers are denying. Who cares if a few trees are dying? This is all gratifying. How bad? How bad can this possibly be?
On July 10th, the Chicago White Sox defeated the Minnesota Twins. They would then go on a historic 21-game losing streak, the first 20-game losing streak since 1988, and tying the AL record. The streak finally ended on August 7th when they defeated the Oakland A's. 2 days after the win, manager Pedro Grifol was fired. While not 100% his fault, the way he managed the game came under heavy scrutiny from both players and the media. Despite having the worst record in baseball, the White Sox can't pick higher than 10th overall in next year's draft. When the MLB introduced the draft lottery, it prevents big market teams from getting consecutive high picks each year. What was supposed to be a new era for White Sox baseball turned out to be a disaster. So what happened? Why is this team so terrible? Well, many of the top prospects never lived up to the hype. Moncada never lived up to being a top 3 prospect. Injuries held him in his back from reaching his full potential. Giolito was a solid pitcher, but never reached the potential many saw. The only ones who really worked out were Rivera, Cease, Lopez, and Kopech, the final 2 being relief pitchers on different teams. While many of the MLB's top teams, such as the Braves, Astros, and Dodgers, have developed a great reputation for developing players, the White Sox failed to create a great development system, which makes the Getz promotion more puzzling. Some of this also falls on Williams and Hahn. While they were able to get great prospects in return, Hahn's drafting record under the rebuild left a lot to be desired. Some argue that Hahn and Williams were the wrong people to oversee the rebuild. Despite building a World Series winner, it's easy to believe that Williams was around for too long, being GM of the team from 2000 to 2012 and executive vice president from 2013 to 2023. But that could also fall on owner Jerry Reinsdorf. Reinsdorf lucked into a generational talent in 1984 to give him a great reputation that he has built on. In his older years, Reinsdorf has grown contempt in old age and has chosen to surround himself with those he knows best. It's a problem for both the White Sox and the Bulls. He kept 2 executives around arguably longer than he should have been. He went over their heads to hire one of his friends and make up for a mistake years ago when he hired Tony La Russa instead of someone else who was better for the team. He chose cheap on a manager with Pedro Grifol. When everything fell apart in 2023 and Williams and Hahn were finally fired, he chose instead of bringing in someone new to promote someone who was a part of the train wreck. Now, Chris Getz could go on to be a great general manager, but his hiring says a lot about Reinsdorf and the team culture. Off the field, Reinsdorf has tried to get a new ballpark, with current ballpark Guaranteed Rate Field, terrible name, starting to age. However, Reinsdorf is also seeking $1 billion in public funding. Reinsdorf has even flirted with the idea of moving the team to Nashville if he doesn't get his way. While I would love to say something good about the Chicago White Sox, I honestly can't. This team's a mess and a disgrace to their baseball fans. Be ready to tune into Chicago Sports Radio in 2038. Oh boy.
You're just gonna hear from me again in 2038. You're just gonna hear from me again in 2038. You're just gonna hear from me again in 2038. You're just gonna hear from me again in 2038. You're just gonna hear from me again in 2038.